Thank you for joining me today. We are going to be talking about the Canadian Professional Standard for Counseling and Psychotherapy. It's an entry to practice competency assessment that is currently being used by the CRPO. One of the things you'd like to know about the assessment design, no doubt, is how long is this, how hard is this, and how is it made, so that you can be fully prepared when you begin to take this assessment. All simulations are aligned to the competency statements for the profession. Those competency statements are found in a profile on CRPO's website. The assessment design is one of simulation. The reason for this is we want to try and make an exam that feels more normal, more reasonable, more rational to the type of experiences that entry to practice counselors and psychotherapists have. We don't typically ask a barrage of questions of our clients. We typically listen carefully to them and through context, work together towards the goals that are being set. In this way, simulation fits much better than a multiple choice or a case study exam. All of the simulations that you find on the assessment are based on authentic situations and settings that are typically faced by entry to practice therapists in Canada. We find out what these are by looking at the Stats Canada data that comes through each year to find out what is it that brings people to therapy. And it is those simulations that form the context within which all of the simulations on the exam are created. The full assessment is designed to address the legal requirements of regulatory colleges that include an examination as part of their regulation. It's only one part of a multi-pronged system of determining whether or not an entry to practice practitioner is ready for clients on an independent basis. So some of the other places that assessments are occurring are things that have to do with the candidate's prior learning, their supervised practica, continuing education, supervised internship, quality assurance monitoring by the college. So the exam is only designed as one part of a multi-faceted approach to assessment to make sure that all people who are working under the auspices of CRPO as a regulated psychotherapist are in fact eligible to be working independently and posing as much as possible no harm to the client. The design of the exam has 10 simulations. These simulations are attempts at trying to find 10 different situations that entry to practice therapists may find themselves in. There are 5 to 8 sections per simulation, and each of those sections have got 3 components to them. There's a scenario. That's the part that provides the setting and the introductory client information, things like their age, their gender, their presenting problem, things that would likely be on their intake form. Then there's a section on information gathering. That's the work that we do as psychotherapists to find out what is it that we need to know about the client and that the client needs to know about us for us to do relevant work with them, to find out what it is about their family background, the status of their physical health, previous information or experiences that they have had with counseling and psychotherapy so that we are better informed on what might work best for this client. And then there's the decision-making component. That's the part that requires the candidate taking the test to make therapeutic judgments or decisions with the client in order to proceed to help them through the issue that is presenting. Let's talk for a moment about the calibration process. This is an exam, let's be honest. So every time you're in the simulation, which is reflecting the real world, you're going to be presented with some options. What is it that you want to do at this time to get information from the client or to make decisions? All of those options may or may not be the most important thing to do at this time. It's going to be of key importance that you read the STEM very carefully to find out what is my purpose here before you select an option, because all of the options have a calibration. They're either a +3, it's something that is of central importance for good client care at this time in this context. It's +2, is strongly facilitative of good client care. +1, mildly good, but it's not necessarily the most direct route to take with the client based on the information that you have right now. Some of the options are calibrated at a 0. It doesn't contribute to client care, but it doesn't cause any harm either. And if it wasn't there, it would just feel really strange that we hadn't actually done something that we typically do to relax a client, to reassure a client, or anything like that that's rather benign, not positive or negative, but necessary for our work. -1 would be a calibration for something that's mildly unhelpful to the client. It could be detrimental in terms of time or cost, but it's not something that's going to make the client want to run away from you screaming. It's something that's going to make a client say to themselves, I wonder if they were really listening hard to what I was trying to say. Maybe I'll reframe that for them, and then we'll get it the next time around. -2 is a little bit more serious. These are the things that cost us the type of therapeutic alliance that we want with a client. These are the times when clients go like, I don't think you're understanding me. I didn't come here for X. I came here for Y. Why are we going to the left when I was asking you to go to the right? These are things that are going to cause a client to think, am I wasting my time here? Am I wasting money? Am I just going to just give up and not try therapy? Am I going to try something else? -3, of course, is a calibration that's gravely damaging. There are not going to be a lot of -3s, and there's not going to be a lot of +3s in the calibration process. Most of them are going to swing between +2 and -2 because all of us have got different preferred modalities of practice, and some things that are a +3 for some modalities of practice are not a +3 in other modalities of practice. So you would have to be like the best therapist on the planet, and there would be no other option possible for a +3 to be hanging in there a lot on the exam. And -3s, those would be indications where the client has said that they have serious suicidal ideology or homicidal tendencies. Their life or the life of somebody else is in danger, and there was no uptake by the therapist to address that issue at that time. So those would be things that are gravely damaging to client care, very costly in terms of welfare, and may in fact cause you to lose your client forever. So the calibration process refers to each of the options that you are presented with within the simulation. Every time you select an option, you're either gaining points, losing points, or occasionally it's a benign, it's a 0, right? So you have to make sure that when you're selecting an option, this is just a test-taking tip. When you're selecting those options, you're looking at the stem and saying to yourself, what do I already know about this client? What is of critical importance to do at this time? Why am I selecting these options? Is it for treatment planning? Is it for therapeutic alliance? Is it as a follow-up? What is my purpose here? And then what are the crucial things to select at this time? Now, a good strategy, because it's a test, is to say, right, let's look at all of the options, and which ones do I know for sure, definitely, absolutely are essential. Click those, because remember, as soon as you click an option, you cannot unclick it. Just like in the real world, you can't say something to a client and then suddenly erase it and put it back in your mouth as though it never happened. So the test functions in the same way as the real world in that regard. So what you're looking for is those things that are going to be of most importance, and you can identify them right away. You go, okay, that's it. Now look at the rest of them. Are there any other ones there that look pretty good, given the context, given what you know about this client at this time, that you think would be helpful to pick? Select them. But if you find yourself saying, gee, I wonder if they mean this, or, well, I could do that if this, then you're probably second guessing yourself and likely avoid them. What you want to pick are the ones that you see as strongly facilitative and mildly facilitative and you want to avoid the ones that are detrimental in any way. Pick up as many positives you can, avoiding the negatives. Now, if it is an item that has multiple choices that you can make, remember, not all of them are going to be positives. Not all of them are going to be negatives. Now, it's not going to be half and half or 3/4 and 1/4. It's going to be dependent on the context and the number of +2s, +1s, +3s, -1s, -2s, -3s that are in the option list. And remember, all of those options might be effective at one point or another, but you're asking yourself in this calibration process, what is it that's most facilitative at this time for my purpose? What do I already know? What's my goal? In terms of how much of the competency profile is assessed by each of the versions of the exam, there is at least 10 to 15% of those options in those simulations that are involved with making an initial assessment. 10 to 15% of it is on establishing a working relationship. 20 to 25% therapeutic relationship. 5 to 10 working towards change. 5 to 10 again on managing separations and endings. At least 10 to 15 on professional practice, and about 3 to 5 on making use of supervision, including going for a consult with somebody. Now, those are minimums. They're at least that amount. As you know, therapeutic alliance is the most important thing that we have at our disposal to facilitate change with a client. The more that we can develop that therapeutic alliance, the more likely it is that we're going to be able to communicate clearly what it is that the client is wanting, needing, and having concerns with, and what it is that we can do to be of assistance with them. For that reason, that is why you've got that 20 to 25% of the assessment looking at that therapeutic relationship. For those of you that really like a visual, this is showing you what that would look like on a pie chart, where you can see the largest area is going to be that therapeutic alliance, right? That area 3, the relationship building piece. This slide shows you the number of competencies that are being covered off in each area. So there are about 37 competencies in that profile in area 3. You can see that there are 97 competencies in area 6. And if we go back for a minute, you'll see area 6 is professional practice. Professional practice involves all of those things that are relating to, do you know your jurisprudence? Do you know when you need to be consulting with a third party on something that's happening? Do you behave in a way in your practice, in your note-taking, in all of the professional practice areas? Have you got those pieces in place? That's why there are so many competencies in that area. They all mix and match with other competencies. There are very few times in the real world, and there are very few times on the exam where only a single competency is being tested. They're often being tested in combination with other competencies because they impact your ability to be able to respond adequately to clients as they have needs arising in the therapy process. Now, having said that, not only are those competencies combinations often, they also have a retest component happening across the exam. So if you don't happen to get the positives on certain competencies in one simulation, and it perhaps is dealing with a young child and you feel far more comfortable with geriatric clients, then there's another option later on when you're taking the next simulation or 3 further down the road that has those same competencies being tested a second time or a third time based on a client in a different context or at a different age or a different situation. Here's an example of what these simulations look like. This may make it a little simpler to understand the abstraction of what's actually going on. So this is the concept sample that you'll find in your resource manual. It's Lucia, and you're a therapist. This is the scenario piece that I mentioned earlier. This is who came in through your door just now. You're a therapist in group private practice. This is your first meeting with a new client. Her name's Lucia. On her intake form, she tells you she's 32, recently separated. She has 2 school-aged children, been separated for 7 years. Her family doctor suggested that she try psychotherapy to address what he described to her as the early signs of depression. Now, on the exam, you'll see a piece that says, now go to section A. And you click these sections, and they will tell you what happens next. And there you see those options. Remember, these are the options that have got the calibrations of pluses and minuses. And at the top, you can see there's that context that I was saying you have to be so careful about, that STEM. They're asking you, in your first meeting with Lucia, what information would best assist you in determining potential directions for therapy at this time? Not 2 weeks down the road, not as a homework assignment, but at this time. This is your first meeting, and you can select as many as you consider. So you might want to look at client self-awareness, physical ailments, presenting problem, prior mental health, etc. Now remember, what I'm showing you here on this slide is not an actual test item. It's designed just to show you how the exam works. So let's say, for instance, that you read that STEM and you say to yourself, in your first meeting with Lucia, what information would best assist me in determining the potential direction? Okay, I'm going to pick this one. I'm going to pick client self-awareness. Now, I can't unclick that. That's forever. And up pops how the client responds. Lucia is reflective and articulate. Well, that's important to know, right? Because now you're going to be able to determine, well, I could do a psychodynamic type of approach with this person. They're reflective, they're articulate, they might be self-aware in terms of insight, and this might be a good option, right? What else might be important? Well, you might say, how about her physical ailments? Well, she's got minor aches and pains. So each time you pick something, up will pop what the client does or doesn't do. As you know, sometimes we throw something out there to a client and they just go, nothing. There's just a blank. Well, that means something too. So please don't think that when you get an answer that just says the client looks down, that it's anything more than the client just looked down, right? All right, let's look at some more. What if you pick presenting problem? Well, she says she feels sad. She has no energy, has trouble sleeping. So you can see what's happening. You're beginning to create for yourself a whole pile of information from the client as you start selecting some of these options. Up in the top right-hand corner of your screen when you're writing the exam will be a note-taking section where you can take electronic notes if you want. You'll also be provided with pieces of paper so that you can write notes if you want. But also remember, you can always go back. Like in the real world, you can go back to the notes that you took from your previous session. You can do exactly the same thing on the exam. You can go back and say, what did I pick? What did I do? Right? Just like you can figure out in the real world, what did I do with that client the last time I saw them? So you have a running commentary, and you can always go back and check that commentary. You don't have to keep it in your head at all times. So let's say you picked prior mental health treatment and you find out that she's never had any history of mental health services. Important to know, right? Because if she is somebody who has a history of mental health services and she found it entirely intrusive and she was non-compliant and didn't like what was being done, and she tells you what kind of therapy it is, that gives you an indicator of where you might want to go in your therapy with her. So all of them are going to do that same thing. Every time you select an item, then you're going to have more information popping up. As I said earlier, remember, not all of those options are going to be correct for this time based on the STEM. Not all of them are going to be wrong either. They're all going to be calibrated from a +3 to a -3. And in case you're wondering what's happening, we're looking at the area of 4.5B, G, I, K, L, and 4.2E on your profile just by looking at those few items. So you can see very quickly how there are multiple opportunities for combinations of competencies to be tested and retested, even in a single section of a single simulation. And just as a reminder, you have 10 simulations and 3 hours to write the exam. Let's look at section B. Here's another one where you're selecting as many as you consider indicated in this section. At the conclusion of your first meeting, it says, what options would be indicated? Well, let's see. We could refer her to social services. We could refer her to a medical doctor, offer individual therapy, offer family therapy, suggest in-house divorce mediation services, provide a brief description about experience and expertise with similar presenting problems. Now, none of those are earth-shattering and life-ending, but we're looking for what would be indicated at this time. This is at the conclusion of your first meeting. So let's say you selected refer to a medical doctor. Well, she's not going to respond. I would suggest to you that that's probably calibrated negative because she just came from her medical doctor. And that competency there has to do with being in the present moment with the client and listening carefully. That active listening piece is critically important there. She's not going to want to be referred back to the medical doctor. She just came from there. Maybe you want to offer individual therapy. That's likely a positive. Lucia shows interest. How about provide a brief description of your experience and expertise? She feels reassured. So once again, every time you select something, something's going to pop up. Each of those options has a calibration attached to it. You're either gaining marks or losing marks as you go. And again, if you look at what's happening, we're looking predominantly at section 4 and a little bit of 1 in terms of what are the competency areas that are being checked into when we're looking at these particular options. And again, not a real test, right? This is just showing you how the exam works. Section C is another example. Now you can see how the simulation is moving you through therapy sessions, right? As you prepare for the next session, which of the following actions would be helpful in planning for collaborating with your client? Again, you can select as many. You could have a phone conversation, establish short-term objectives, plan for the children. You could select established treatment issues. She gets involved in the process, and so on. And it just keeps working that same way as we've done in section A and B. Now we're on C. And again, many of the competency areas are being checked into. Section D is a little bit different. Here's one where you can only choose one item. And again, you can't go back. You can't change your mind. As soon as you click an option, that's the option you've got. At the beginning of this session, you notice that Lucy is noticeably thinner. She looks tired. She says she nearly didn't come. She's been having more trouble caring for herself and her children. What do? You can only choose one. Well, you could connect with social services. You could explore patterns of behavior, conduct a risk assessment, refer her to a medical doctor. Let's say you did a risk assessment completed. Now, if you selected that, you would never get to select any of the other items, right? They wouldn't be available to you. It would say, now go to section E. Let's say you connect client with social services and she'll say, not interested, right? Just don't want to do it. But you can't choose another one. You can only choose one item in this section. So that's why it's so very important to look at the STEM and to figure out what is it that I'm selecting. When you're in the multiple decision-making items, like in section A, B, and C, it doesn't matter what order you select them in. It's just whether you selected them or whether you didn't. When you get to a select only one, because you can only select one, it's very important, the order, because you only get one option. And again, you can see what are the items that are being checked off from the competency profile. Here's another one, section E, where we're seeing a whole pile of options, and when we look over to the side, you're going to see the same options. You're going to see the same calibrations from +3 to -3, and a multitude of competencies that are being considered as you go through those options for the client. Now let's look at that section E another way. Let's figure out why they would be calibrated the way they are. So one of the first options, I'll go back so you can see, it says suggest the client use the agency 24-hour. I'm just taking the items from the left-hand column there and putting them on the left-hand column of this chart. So the option is suggest she use the agency 24-hour phone number. You can see the competency areas that are being tested right there. The calibration is a +2, but why? The answer is because it aligns with the ethical code and it enhances autonomy. Maybe you offer your off-hour phone number but have no direct contact. That's a -2, is a boundary violation. So every time it has, it being the option, has a calibration, there has to be a reason for that calibration, and that reason has to be aligned directly to the competency profile. At no time can the test anything that is not in the competency profile. Explore the need for increasing the frequency of sessions. That's one of those benign ones I talked about earlier. There's no indication that that's a current problem. Perhaps you want to provide a referral network. That's a -1, is not going to cause any huge detrimental issue, but it's not pertinent to the background information that the client was requesting. You might want to normalize the feelings of intense attachment. +2, it's addressing the elephant that's in the room. The client's indicated that this is the problem, right? Review progress to reassure, etc. So you can see that each of those options has got a calibration. It has a competency area that it's addressing, and then there's a rationale according to the competency profile attached to it. Now, every single option throughout every single section of every single simulation has got this factored into it. So let's talk a minute about test-taking strategies for those multiple decision-making items when you're seeing the rationale, the calibration, the competency area right in front of you on the screen at the moment. Remember, you're looking at the context. You're looking at, what do I already know about this client? What do I think is likely the next step that's going to be most helpful? You're going to look for the things that you believe are critically important at this time based on those items. And then you might look at that list again and say, okay, which ones do I know are definitely out? There's just no way. Eliminate the choices that just don't fit. And then look at what's remaining and say to yourself, are any of those likely those plus ones? Are those likely those good to have but not critical to have? And you might want to select those. Remember, at no time are you going to see multiple decision making where all of them are positives or all of them are negatives. Here's section F. This is the last part of Lucia about termination sessions. This is just prior to it. She calls and she cancels. And based on the information gathered to date and your therapeutic alliance, what's the most important thing to do at this time? Most appropriate. So again, this is one of those, you can only choose one. So it's important that you look at it very carefully and say to yourself, okay, of these 4 in this context, knowing what I know about this client and where we have been, and you can click back to check on your exam if you're not sure or you think you don't remember, you can always click back to check and then go back to this one and say, all right, I think that the most important one to select is, and then you make that selection. You can't take it back, so make sure that it's the one that you want, the one that's most critical. So you might send a letter, and the letter would be sent. Now, of course, you don't have any other options, but in this case, if you contacted the client, then she'd thank you for calling. In every case, there's going to be an option, is why I'm showing you this. You're never going to see a blank that says, try again. You're not going to see a blank that says, oops, nope. It's going to tell you what the client would have done, or what somebody would have done, or what the agency would have done if that option had been selected. Make sense? That's how it works. And there you can see the competency areas that are being covered off by section F. So what did we just see? We saw 6 sections of one simulation. It wasn't a full simulation. It was only a partial. But just in that little tiny snippet, we saw 5 areas of the competency profile being tapped. 3 of them were showing up in Lucia. In the sub areas within those 5 competency profiles, there are 25. 12 of them were showing up with Lucia. There are 130 competencies in your profile. 27 of them were being covered off just by that very brief example that you've seen. So you can see that through a whole exam, 3 hours, 10 simulations, there's going to be testing and retesting of the competencies in different contexts with different kinds of clients with different kind of presenting issues. And those presenting issues are going to be the ones that most commonly are addressed by entry to practice practitioners. We know that they are certainly the ones that are coming to therapy agencies, private practitioners, hospitals. We know this because StatsCan keeps a track of what brings Canadians to therapy, and it is based on those that we find are simulations. Now, you may say to yourself, well, I just don't work with children. I don't think I can do that simulation. I'm going to skip it. If you skip a simulation, remember, you can gain no points. And you must meet the cut score in both decision making and in information gathering in order to be successful on the exam. So skipping is not in your best interest. You cannot jump forward in time in the real world to find out what happens to a client. And so on this exam, you also can't jump forward to find out, okay, I'm going to skip this section, go to the next one within this simulation, and then come back to it. So doesn't happen in the real world, so it doesn't happen on the exam. You are therefore unable to gain any points in the section within a simulation that you skipped. So these are critical pieces that you have to think about. So just as a recap, each assessment contains 10 simulations. Each simulation contains multiple competencies in context. Each of them are calibrated based on potential for harm, and it's impossible to pass the assessment by selecting all or by skipping questions. When you go to take the assessment, a key piece that's of critical importance is being able to identify yourself as the correct test taker. That means that the information that you've provided to your regulatory college indicating what your name is what you have to present at the test taking center. So if your government issued identification does not match the name that you have given to the CRPO, then you're going to have difficulty when you go to the test center. You'll have to have multiple pieces of identification in order to solve that. The best case scenario is to alert the CRPO to what is your real name as it appears on the government issued identification, so that the proctors at the test centers are aware that you are in fact the person that is supposed to be writing the test, because of course they've never seen you before and they can't identify you by face. We use test centers located right across Canada. They've been secured by a third-party test administrator, and there's a seamless process of taking the test in a secure setting with these trained proctors. They're experienced in high-stakes testing protocols, and these protocols have been piloted many times, administered many times. There's a secure online bilingual application process, and there's a test taker guidebook to familiarize you with the process and the test taking platform. There's also a practice tutorial that can be taken at any time, anywhere. It is a tutorial that is just helping you figure out how to navigate the software that is presenting the exam to you. It looks very similar to what I have just presented in this webinar, but if you want to see the actual exam software and how it looks, that's one of the key ways to do it. The actual tutorial, by the way, is about somebody who's moving. It's not actually about the profession of psychotherapy. The reason for that is we're trying to facilitate use of the mouse and navigating through the platform rather than anything else there. Test center availability across Canada, including settings outside major settings. We actually ask you where is your preferred location and try and get you within an hour of that location, sometimes an hour and a half at the outside. Typically, we're able to find you something within 15-20 minutes of where you live. Multiple test center locations ensure that you don't have to travel for very long, even if you're in a small town. For northern remote candidates, we have protocols to find individualized solutions for you. And those people that require additional time or conditions due to disability, injury, medical condition, or other situations that might impact their ability to write the exam in the same way as everybody else, and to have a fair shot at the assessment, there is a process for accommodations. There's a form that has to be submitted, and this all has to be done, special accommodations has to be done prior to the actual registration of the exam. Is that the intention to write exam that you must indicate whether you have a unique need or an accommodation or accessibility issue that needs to be addressed for you to have the conditions conducive to you doing the very best that you can possibly do on your exam. So the reason that we need it at the time of intention to write is because it takes a long time to find the right venue with the right proctor and all of the right equipment or the right facility to be able to address those needs. We want everybody to be as comfortable as possible when they write so that they can do their absolute best. Test security is essential to us being able to defend the test as fair, valid, reliable, and have integrity. So there are a lot of security features that are involved with this exam. There's a computer lockdown system that prevents theft of the test information. The lovely thing about that, by the way, it also means that if there's some lightning strike or power outage or flood or some other issue that occurs during the test, all of the items that you have already selected are automatically collected, stored safely off-site. So it's on a server off-site. Those pieces cannot be harmed in any way. That data is secure. That is very relieving to people when something happens because, as you know, with computers, sometimes the computer will, for unknown reasons, suddenly stall, stash, stutter. Any number of things can happen from time to time. Don't worry about it. Just raise your hand. The proctor will help you. All of your data is safe. We have a fail-safe system on the data. The secure test locations with experienced proctors of high-stakes exams only allow us to know that the folks that are taking care of you have seen a lot of different things occur in high-stakes exams and have a protocol that they follow and are well versed in assisting you in doing your best. There are individual passcodes for using the test platform, so please remember your passcode and arrive with it. And we need 2 pieces of photo ID. These should be government issued, plus an official letter of confirmation to write the assessment to obtain access to the exam room. This is just to make sure that it really is you who's coming to write the test. The exam is available 2 times a year, spring and fall, to coincide with those times where most people are coming out of their training or educational programs. And it's consistent with most other high-stakes exams because it reduces the exam costs, and of course that affects the cost of the exam to the candidate. And it reduces the opportunity for various forms of fraud or cheating or collusion. And any unforeseen testing platform errors can be created without negatively affecting the scores of the test takers. And that's it for me for now. My name is Lorna Martin. I'm available for personal consultations. I can be reached at info@compassexams.ca. Good luck.